Hello, everyone. I'm Nasirra, the energy architect, and today we have someone extremely special. This is Leon VanderPol. Hi, Leon.
Hi.
Thank you so much for coming on today. I know that you're really busy. You've made time to come on and talk to us, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this very much.
Thank you. So am I.
Yeah.
I'm just going to introduce Leon now. Leon is pretty popular. Everybody, most people know him, but for people who don't, I'm just going to introduce him. So Leon VanderPol is an internationally recognized leader, spirit-based teacher, and author in the field of transformational coaching and transformative living. He is the founder and CEO of the Center for Transformational Coaching, and his book, A Shift in Being: The Art and Practices of Deep Transformational Coaching, is selling in multiple languages, bringing his work to new audiences daily. Leon has spent over 2 decades immersed in the dynamics of personal, interpersonal, and organizational change, helping people actualize their innate potential. At the core of Leon's teaching lies the healing and transformation of human consciousness. What happens when we consistently begin to experience ourselves beyond our ego mind as our essential self and soul? Today, he works with people from around the world to grow into new paradigms of personal experience, those born of the awakened mind and heart, which invite us to drop below surface level engagement with life's situations, explore the boundaries of our existence, and tap into our most authentic self. Today, Leon is going to be talking about authentic presence, inner transformation, and the role of spirituality in leadership, the being of the person, of the leader. Leon, this is quite an introduction, and many congratulations on the way your book is doing. I
Thank
know
you.
that it has touched so many people, inspired so many people.
Yeah. Yeah, it's quite a wonder in that way. And I'm immensely grateful for the corners of the earth that it has reached. So unexpected in so many ways, but just amazing. Yeah.
Um, Leon, since we're doing the leadership series, I wanted to touch upon this topic of leadership and being and the authenticity that comes with that. And leadership often focuses on doing, yet you emphasize the importance of being. So, what does it mean for a leader to prioritize their being? And how does it really shift or make that impact in their leadership style?
Yeah. These are big questions. These are big questions. Like, what does it mean to prioritize being over doing? And, I cannot speak to all leaders everywhere. So I'm just going to speak at times in what may seem like generalizations and also from the experiences that I've had working with people from around the world, leaders from around the world, and understanding this framework of living, working, leading from a being centered or being led awareness. What I have noticed over the years, and this again may be a generalization because it cannot apply to all leaders, but what I've noticed is that this whole concept of being very, very aware of your inner state of being, like in this very moment, who am I choosing to be? And am I being that which I choose to be? that conversation is still a bit of an outlier in the leadership world. And it's not necessarily fully understood what it means to live or lead through a deep being-centered awareness. So that's why I find these conversations to be immensely valuable because we are really kind of touching the leading edge here around what it is to live in this way and then lead in this way, where beingness becomes the leader, it's or the forefront of kind of my conscious action versus my strategy or versus the way I'm communicating or something of this nature. So there's a long conversation around what it means to be a leader who leads from being or who lives from deep being centered awareness. But what I've noticed for those leaders who are beginning to walk down this path, it opens up whole new doorways of potential within themselves that they may not have tapped into or fully understood before. Many leaders are natural leaders. They have been born in with certain gifts, certain talents, certain abilities, and those led them, even from a young age, into positions of leadership, often almost seemingly by default, just because they were the ones that embodied, exhibited leadership qualities, and others would follow or listen to. And many have developed certain qualities of their character and their abilities so that they could advance as leaders. And we see in organizations around the world all kinds of leadership trainings that are intended to help people develop themselves in different kinds of ways, from interpersonal relationships to communication to different ways of thinking about themselves and their relations to the world and their work. So we see all of this training and development that's happening, but very often we're building upon a kind of natural set of talents that people have. And not necessarily are we asking these deeper questions like, but in any given moment, who are you being now? And orienting the mind towards that state of self within, in which there is a sense of beingness, which is, to speak to your podcast on energy, it's kind of like a state of consciousness or energy that's alive within us that we exude all the time. And it's different from just daily energy. This is a good, maybe a bit of a discerning point here, because when we talk about daily energy, for example, one day my mood is good and my energy is up and I feel great. I feel alive. I feel like in the world. The next day, maybe I got to bed too late. Maybe I'm not sleeping well. And I wake up and I'm grumpy and my mood's down. I'm like, oh, I'm feeling more constricted and contracted. So we see that energy moves like this, like it's up, it's down. And of course, we all say, well, I love feeling great and I want to feel my best all the time. And I have to look at those things that perhaps I'm doing where my energy is not doing great. But energy is not the same on that level, on that kind of physical, mental, emotional level, all those wavelengths is not the same as beingness. Like, who am I being? There's something to discern in ourselves in that way. And this is where I talk about the learning leading edge, because that, like, what is that I'm actually pointing to within a human being when I'm saying, what is your state of being in this moment? It's not just the answer, well, I feel good, or my energy's high, or the opposite, my energy's low, I feel bad. I feel down, I feel depressed, or I feel blue, or I feel anxious, or I feel stressed. Those are emotional indicators, but that's not the deep beingness that we're pointing to. We have to drop below all of that. Drop below, drop below, drop below until we get to a kind of core sense of self. And okay, now we've sort of landed in beingness. And then the awareness begins to arise there. Okay, what is that? What is it to live in that? What does it look to lead in that? What does that even got to do with anything? Like, what does that got to do with all the things that I'm engaged in each day? With the projects I must handle, with the decisions I must make, with the challenging customers, clients, communications I must make? What's that got to do with it? So there's a conversation in there that I think is very important for people who are kind of embarking on this understanding of being centered or being led leadership to have, so they can kind of gain an awareness of what it is that we're actually pointing to and talking about. Because there can be different images. And I'll just share a quick story. I was doing a training in China at one point, and I was talking about being. And I had a translator working with me, and a translator had worked with me for quite some time. And the translator very well understood the word being. And so I'm not concerned that the translation was off, that they were communicating the essence of what I was trying to say. But don't forget, people who've never had that conversation, it's going to land differently for each person. People who spent time in that will have a different understanding from people who are encountering or hearing words like this for the first time in their lives. And so the question came, well, who do you choose to be? Like, what does this mean to choose a way of being? And one of the guys says, I choose to kick ass. That was in Chinese. I choose to
Right.
kick ass, right? And we all broke down laughing. But I looked at my translator's face, and you could see she was a little bit chagrined because at that moment, she kind of recognized, wait a minute, that's not what we're really talking about. We're talking about, that's kind of an ego structure or an egoic sense of beingness. Like I want to be the guy who kicks ass in my work, in my leadership.
Yeah.
We want to go deeper. And so I saw her for a moment there kind of have to kind of recover her composure and then launch again into an explanation of sort of saying, well, that is a way of being, a way of thinking about a way of being. Like I want to be a rock star. I want to be a rock and roll star in my business. But what happens when we start to drop deeper? What do we get to? We get to something a lot more essential in the nature of who we are. And so then, of course, you could see a slow dawning of perhaps understanding happening, but still not an immediate grasp of what this whole kind of world that we were pointing to is talking about. So I'll pause there because you may have some thoughts on that, but it's just kind of an introduction that this whole question of beingness and who do I choose to be and what does it mean to live through being is still very new for many people, and interpretations of what and understandings of what that is do differ greatly.
I agree with you. What's coming to my mind is, really moving to the core of who you are and how you what's really deep inside of you. For me, it's like an onion. You kind of keep peeling off all of the layers, okay, and uh, you just shed them one by one, one by one, one by one, till you understand what's really the source of who you are, what you are,
Mm.
exactly what you are.
So
So,
this is good. So when I ask you, like that onion that you're speaking to, what are those layers? Like, how would you characterize what the layers of the onion are that we're shedding, so to speak?
things like fear of people's judgments, okay, things like um, loving myself a little bit more, shame, things like ego, um, um, getting even, pride,
Mm,
uh,
mm,
letting go of all of these,
yeah,
fear of moving ahead, or inhibitions, things like um, it's it's like a very heart centric approach for me.
yeah. Yeah, I think you're speaking to what I would just characterize in a general way as ego patterns, like ego patterns from fears, from false images about ourself, negative thoughts, strong, hard emotions that we may need to deal with. All of that is a kind of construct. I like the image of the onion. I use that image myself. Like there's something at the core that is essential, but over a lifetime of conditioning and learning, we start to build up this shell of ego. And
I'll
that
tell you
ego
how.
takes us, sorry, go ahead. No, finish your
No,
thought.
no,
Yeah.
please tell me.
I was just going to say that ego shell takes us further away from the connection with that deeper essence, self and being, right? And so the more difficult or challenging our upbringing, often the more traumatic our upbringing, the earlier we start to really build this kind of shell of ego, which is designed as a kind of armor against the world. We put on personas, we start to wear masks. We try to show the world that we're one thing, where well deep inside we're altogether something different. We all carry fears. We are human beings. We all have fear. But we try to learn early on, well, if I can just mask the fear, if I can just show up in a certain way that nobody sees that I'm doubting myself or that I'm worried or concerned, that I am the fearless one, who can lead unabashedly kind of thing. So we learn these qualities of ego and they become a shell. So I like that idea of the onion rings. And I can speak a bit more to that in a minute, but I'd love to hear what you were going to say there.
Yeah. So how I see myself is like the tree here. Okay. I don't know if you can see the tree has roots. It's really deep, but it's got a heart. That's the best way that I can represent me and why I identify with this tree, the tree of life, which is, of course, common, but the heart is mine and the roots are mine. The roots are so deep and they're so strong that it's such an internal thing for me. And even if there is a storm, because I am so deeply rooted and because I am clear about what my heart wants, even if there's a storm outside, it's I'm not going to get uprooted. So everything around me can keep going around, but I'm there, solid. And that's exactly how I feel. For
Yeah,
me, that is my being.
right. So it is connected, it is through the roots into something deep and essential that you nourish and replenish and live through. Like, and so I'm sort of seeing this image of the tree being the expression
Yeah.
of something that is deeply rooted in something that is not necessarily visible on the surface, but is a kind of source essence of life. And for the tree too. Yeah. Yeah, this is a wonderful image to work with. This idea that there is something deeper within us, something of source, something essential, but over a lifetime of conditioning, and I mean conditioning meaning we are absolutely conditioned creatures. And we often are blind to the scale and extent that we have been conditioned by our family and its values and belief systems, by our cultures and its values and belief systems, our societies, our relationships. And then, of course, as we grow, we start to learn from the world, and there's conditioning in that too. We join an organization, they condition us the way that they want us to think and feel and act within their walls. It continues and continues. And through all that conditioning, we start to lose connection with that ground of being, that source, essence, sense of self. And we start to believe that the way to live in this world, and we don't believe this necessarily consciously, we're just doing it, is to live through all of these conditioned layers, these egoic constructs, so that we can meet the world's demands, that we can meet the world's values, that we can be successful in the way that the world wants us to be successful, that we can have the things that we desire to have, and that the world has said to us, these are the things you should have. So we can make our parents proud of us, whatever it may be. We want to meet all of that on that surface level expression. And so the surface level, the top of that tree will look differently depending on, in a sense, how deep those roots go to the source, how deeply it's feeding and nurturing off that deeper sense of self and source. And that's why, like, when I ask somebody the question, like, who do you choose to be? We get a range of answers from I want to kick ass to I want to be the presence of love. You get these varying ranges because everybody has a different interpretation of what it means to be something, depending on their own connection with their own essence, sense of self, and that deeper being that is, the core of who we are. The deeper or more connected they are to that, the different kind of fruit per se that the tree bears. Let's put it that way, right? The way it looks different in the world, it smells different in the world, right? So we get these range of answers to those questions, and that's perfectly okay because at least we're engaging in the conversation. It doesn't mean that everybody has to immediately have the same answer, but it is interesting to note the qualitatively different answers. And then if you spend time with the people who give you those answers, you start to notice that there is, coming to presence, a different quality of presence about each of these people. For again, example, when you're in the presence of someone who has made love as their core essence way of being and expression in the world through whatever they're doing, no matter where they show up in the world, being with that person is an altogether different experience than someone who wants to be out there, let's say, in a competitive environment and doing the very best they can and winning at the game, which takes its own kind of energy and state of being. Again, not to judge either of them, but being in the presence of these people is going to be a qualitatively different kind of experience for us. And that's what we're kind of pointing to with leadership is that many people, I believe, are blind to their own quality of being and presence in the world because they haven't actually been consciously working on developing it because they don't necessarily even know what it means to develop it. Like, what does that even mean to me? I have no idea what this is. So without that knowledge, they're by kind of default showing up as they are. And they can learn to modify their behaviors. Sure, we can learn to say, talk less. If we used to be very talkative, we can learn to control our talk. We can learn to manage our emotions better. We can learn to manage our energy better. It's all these words managing, right? So we can learn to manage these aspects of our personality so that they are better suited to our environments. Yes, absolutely. But that doesn't mean that when you're in the presence of that, I should say, it means still that when you're in the presence of that person, they're going to have a certain quality of energy and being that radiates through. And I'll give another little example here, if that's okay. So when I was a young coach back in my early days, I was not yet myself as deeply grounded in my own sense of being, perhaps, as I am today. Because for me, it's been a long journey as well to understanding what it all means. And I was working with the managing director of a very large hotel chain in the Asian city I was living in at the time, which was Taipei. And whenever I went to his office for our conversations to talk with him, have their session, he had just come in off the floor. And this was a man who was, and I guess the best way I could describe it was high strung. He was a man who was eyes open. He saw everything that happened in that hotel. He would walk that floor, striding across that floor, not in an angry way, but just always on the go and vigilant to everything. And you could see that when people would approach him, there was always a sense of like trepidation in their approaching of this man. He was capable. He'd been obviously promoted to the highest levels of this organization, great levels of responsibility, clearly extremely good at what he did. And yet, just noticing how people responded to this energy, this presence that he carried as he strode across. And he would come into our sessions and he'd sit behind his desk. And I would notice that his leg was just, some people's legs just up and down the whole time. Just that nervous energy, unaware of it completely. It was there for him all the time. And after an hour of sitting with him, I would notice that the neck muscles behind me, I was the most tense person in the world when I walked out of there. In other words, I was picking up, not even consciously, just picking up his intense nervous energy, and I was housing it in my body. And I would walk out of there, and the first thing I would do was go to the park across the street, kind of stretch out a bit and breathe because so I was taking this on. I say this was in my early days when I was not yet grounded. My roots from my tree were not necessarily as deep as they are today. And I was still susceptible to taking this on. But it had me realize like this is a wonderful example of extremely capable, intelligent, not even uncaring leadership, like caring professional leadership. And yet his presence, his quality of being and energy made everyone around him tense. Now, this is not why he hired me to work with him, by the way. It was not, oh, I'm aware of this quality of selfhood that I'm carrying, and I would really like to work with you so that people can relate to me better because I don't really understand why carry this or why. No, that was not even remotely our topic of conversation. But that was my only real memory of this man and my experience with him was everything else we talked about was superficial because that's how intense and how intensely I experienced this aspect of himself. So I'm just sharing that because again, it's this idea that many people, leaders especially, are not cognizant of the quality of their being and presence. And yet it is possibly the thing that trumps all, including their great capabilities, their intelligence, their decision-making abilities, their relational abilities. It may trump all of that and yet be completely unaware that it's even a thing.
Leon, that's so right. I know so many people who do that and they have no idea.
No idea. No,
And
no.
they
The
don't get
most
it. Even if
powerful
you
leaders
point
in the
it
world,
out, even if you point it out to
yeah,
them, they don't get it.
they don't get it. No, exactly. Yeah, it's default mode. And there's
Yeah.
such unawareness around it. Yes, and that's what I'm pointing to. And this is not to judge people for not having awareness. This is again just saying this is the leading edge of where we need to be in conversations with leaders today. And we're not even yet even talking about the deepest of the deep stuff. We're simply just talking about becoming aware of presence and the quality that you exude and the impact it has on the people that you are leading. And it may be, just maybe, detrimental to all that you're trying to really achieve and accomplish.
It's such a, they affect everybody around them and they don't know it.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
how do you think leaders can really balance this external expectation of success and numbers, performance, with their own internal journey of becoming more authentic?
Yeah, those two, they can sound mutually exclusive, but I don't think that they are, right? But there is a learning in how to, you use the word balance, maybe the word is integrate
Yeah.
those two qualities. Absolutely, because they are on first glance, for me at least, part of two different worlds. There's the deep inner world, and there's the external world and its expectations, the numbers game. That whole thing is an external construct. There is no, universal reality in this, not to mathematics, I mean, but to this idea that, we've got to hit this number and these targets and make these things happen because that's the way it's got to be. This is all stuff we make up, right? It's made up and it's all external. And then there's that deep internal piece. Who am I being? My quality of presence. And as you may have experienced, I certainly experienced this as I went on my own personal journey of deep inner transformation, of peeling away this rings of the onion to get closer to the essence of who I am. I started to care less and less about the external manifestations. The numbers game mattered less and less. When I was a highly competitive young man, the numbers game mattered because it was about winning and losing. And if we hit the numbers, if we made the targets, if we achieved the things on an external level that we wanted to achieve, I got validation, I got promotion, I got money, I got all the trappings of life. And gosh, that felt good. That part of me that wanted that and needed that felt really good. And there can be a lot of fun, a lot of play, a lot of energy in that world of kind of meeting that. But then on the other side of it, when I went deeper into myself and I started to explore the vast space that is the internal reality, a space that I find endlessly fascinating, never dull, I started to notice that that external stuff started to shine a little bit less. The
Mhm.
sheen would dull. And so then for a while it was, and many spiritual paths, the aspirants along it will speak about this idea of forsaking the external world. Like, let's just forsake it all because it's really just an illusion anyway. What is real is the internal reality. And I'm not going to dispute that because on some metaphysical level, that is absolutely true. But it doesn't necessarily work when we are here in the world day by day. It doesn't work for leaders to shun or to, walk away from the external world and all of its responsibilities and trappings. It's the game that, in a sense, we're choosing to play. It's the finite game we're choosing to play, and yet the infinite game calls to us. Okay. So for myself, in my own experience, I noticed that there was a dissolution of my, you know, desire to pursue all of these things as I went deeper into myself. But I too am the CEO of an organization. And so, yeah, the numbers matter in that context. The numbers matter, so to speak. The things that we're doing on an external level, the creations that we're having, the things we're creating, the experiences we're creating for customers, for others, the financial side of it, that all absolutely matters. So yeah, it's a question then that came at some point of like, well, is it a balancing act? Like, how do I balance them? Or more maybe it's, okay, how do I integrate these worlds? Like how does it be so that these things of the external become infused with the energy of my internal? And that is not an easy answer. Like, I'm not going to say, well, here's the secret recipe for making that happen. That, I believe, is an individual, person by person, unique kind of explorational path that will provide its own learnings. But it begins with the question, how do I integrate these two seemingly separate worlds? But they're not really separate, because when you talk about energy, we really are talking about one existence, not two existences. My internal world of energy and being exists in the same kind of universal scape as these external things that we are building and creating together. They're not separate. So it's a question then of how do they want to dance or work or integrate together so that these things on the external become infused with the ideation and the understandings of the deep internal. So how can the infinite game better infuse the finite game so that we're not playing the finite game for the finite game? We start to play the finite game for the expression of the infinite game, let's put it that way. And it becomes itself that expression. So we get numbers. We're not necessarily so then attached to them. Well, we made the numbers this month. We didn't make the numbers this month. We hit the targets. We didn't. We have less problems than we did. We have more problems than we did. We start to hold these things a lot less tightly. Everything becomes lighter in a sense. It becomes more of a field of play because it becomes, as you start to see it, as a field of the extension of your consciousness. And if you can stay in that state, then it endlessly feels interesting and fascinating. And things like stress start to dissipate. Things like worry fall away. Relationships tend to improve because you don't show up as the one who's deeply concerned. Right? You're going to have more of a twinkle in your eye, even as you sit with things that may not be so positive. And you create a more inspired environment because you yourself are not so deeply attached because you've been playing the infinite space, playing in the infinite space where all things are happening. And it becomes a different kind of playground. So I'll pause there because I'm not sure if this is making much sense, but and maybe you have a question around it, but just this idea of like bringing these worlds together, being such a personal journey, but one that we all must take if we're going to lead from deeply within.
It makes absolute sense to me. I'll tell you why. It's when you were describing that, it felt like a little bit of my own journey. So my story is that I was in corporate for about 22 years and I've held leadership roles. Um, and then I realized that, when I started doing energy work, there was a large disconnect in terms of how I was showing up because I believed something else, but I was trying to project something else. Because as a leader, I felt that you need to be strong, you need to be competitive, you need to get the numbers. And my approach has been very, very heart centric. So I felt it didn't quite work then. And
Yeah.
I know that when it was, that the voice inside of me just kept getting louder and louder till I couldn't ignore it anymore. That this is not my game. This is not my game. I don't know I don't know what is, but this for sure is not my game. And I thought maybe it's a midlife crisis, so I ignored it. And then I did it, but about 3 years back, I just said, enough is enough. I'm just going to take my leap of faith. And I did. So I was like really torn. And I realized that it doesn't have to be either or. It really made sense when I started integrating it. So I haven't let go of that side of me completely because that is still 22 years, right? It's still a very large part of my life and everything else. So now when I work, I feel so good because I have all of that background. I'm so grateful for that background, that experience, and the network, and everything that I learned over there. And now I can do more. I can do work that really calls out to me, that makes me happy,
Yes.
and really bring a little bit of this into that.
Yes.
And I realize that even you're not authentic, you're not consistent. You can't be consistent. If it's not coming from the source, it's not consistent because what happens is after like you've tried everything out, whatever you've learned, and then what? And
Right.
then what?
And
Right?
then what?
So,
Yeah.
yeah. So there has to be this um, never-ending supply of whatever the source is that drives you. And so when you spoke about that, this is the experience that came to me. This
Yeah.
is exactly how I felt.
Yeah. Yeah, and you spoke to a few things that triggered some thoughts, and one of this was that at some point you felt that these two worlds couldn't coexist. And many people feel that when they start to go on that deep inner journey into themselves, when they're really drawn into understanding their own essential nature, there will come a time when it feels like the world that they inhabited and the world that they're beginning to inhabit cannot coexist. In the hero's journey, we call that leaving the known world for the unknown world. And it feels a bit like a forsaking of that which was once valued, including relationships that were once valued or work that was once valued. There's a sense of forsaking that these two worlds can't collide. And I see that with many people in the coaching industry is they've left organizational life because they've gone on this journey and they said, it's just not possible for me anymore to show up in these organizations living the way that they want me to live. I can no longer espouse those values. I can no longer hold their objectives as meaningful the way that they choose to. So I'm going to step away. I'm going to kind of reconfigure my life. You called it the midlife crisis. And it can feel like that. Transformation as an inner journey, a really deep inner journey, can feel like a crisis, like something is falling apart. And in fact, it is. That's the beauty of it. It is falling apart. Your old ideation, your old concepts of yourself, the way that life is, the way that life works, are beginning to crack and crumble. What you used to value or were taught to value and believe about the way life is, the way that you are, the way reality is, they're starting to crack and crumble. You're starting to question it all. And you start to question the nature of organizations and why they work the way they do. Well, why do they have mission, vision, and values on the wall and not live it? Huh. For many years, I just walked past that sign, didn't give it any thought. Now I'm starting to look at it wondering, this is an organization that's out of alignment with its mission, vision, and values. And I don't know if I can. So people leave. They begin to reconfigure their life, often from outside. And many people then, coaches, consultants, trainers, mentors, they'll try to go back into organizations and begin to serve organizational life from a kind of outside in versus from being inside. And so I see that as a perfectly natural journey for people who are on. And I don't think that anything needs to be different in that. There's a beautiful self-organizing behavior that happens. But I'm also quite fascinated with the work of Frederick Laloux, who wrote Reinventing Organizations. And he's got what's called an organization culture model. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's effectively 5 stages of organizational culture, and he color codes them from a low level, which is red, which is a very kind of fear-driven organization, let's say like a gang or mafia, to a higher level called teal, which is a very highly evolutionary, purpose-driven organization. And in between, there are a few other ones, which is like amber, um, a bit more like the military, right? You kind of got it's a clean organization, but there's very strict hierarchies and rules. Then you've got Orange, which is a competitive organization, innovative, creative. Most organizations are this. It's kind of orange level. Then there's a green, which is a purpose value driven organization, kind of moving into purpose and values, and then teal. And what fascinated me about this work when I first read it was because teal was this whole new paradigm of consciousness for an organization. But to have a teal organization, you have to have teal leaders. And one of the things that's challenging in the work that he's doing that I've seen is, and there's been whole movements around, becoming a teal organization, is that people are trying to implement best practices of teal organizations into organizations that do not have leadership who are reflective of teal consciousness. So let's say someone at a green, purpose-driven organization or an orange, competitive, innovative organization saying, well, maybe we can adapt some of these teal pieces and we'll become teal. But it's not sustainable because the leaders themselves have not yet gone through their own deep journey. They don't stand as teal. But this is the future. I think this is where we need to be looking. So rather than hopefully in the future, people saying, I don't align to the organization, I need to step away, we're starting to see a growth of organizations that represent the higher states of consciousness. And we build around that. We build around higher states of consciousness. We build around deep being awareness and deep authenticity of every human being in that room. And we start to create organizations, even profitable ones. It's not all some charity work, right? Even profitable
Yeah.
organizations at these higher levels of consciousness. But we have to have leaders go on the journey. This is the piece that I think is the kind of missing piece, is that in the business of life, it's hard to make time and space for a deep inner journey, which takes an immense amount of energy. And that's why, again, people leave organizations, is because they need to get out of the rat race in order to find the time and space to work on themselves. And then they can go back in, kind of reconfiguring the way they work. But the reality is, from my view, we can't have everybody leaving forever. We've got to start building organizations that encourage this form of behavior because they see the value in supporting its own people along deep inner journeys. And that together transforms an organization. Now, this might be a future way, and it may be an ideal for me too, but I can see it happening. What about organizations that encourage people to go on this journey as a collective versus just managing emotions or learn to communicate better or how to manage your project better or, these kinds of technologies that we're currently teaching leaders. So, opportunity.
Wow. Yeah, that's really something. That's quite futuristic, and I really wish a lot more organizations start seeing it that way and start aligning themselves that way.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's hard. Like, it's not easy to do. Like, I've worked with CEOs in organizations who are on this journey. However, the people below them are not.
yeah.
So it's not possible for a CEO who is on this deep inner journey to then just impose upon other people. Oh, you really should be thinking along spiritual lines or deep inner being lines and learn. It's not going to work. So you get the CEO who's changing, and that does have its effect. I won't say there's no effect. There's absolutely trickle down effect, but it's very challenging unless you're starting to get kind of a critical mass at the higher levels. It's challenging to shift organizations on the whole, right? So again, yeah, it's a bit of a future ideal, but again, we need to be talking about where we're going with all of this work too. So there's a possibility for people that they can say, yes, I see, I see. Okay, so Thiel and Laloux's work is pointing to that existential possibility.
That would be an ideal situation, seriously.
Yeah.
So, Leon, how do you see leadership really evolving as more individuals embrace this inner transformation? Um,
I think I was, in a sense, just speaking to how I see that evolving. In the sense, I've got this image of, you call it the teal leader, but again, that's labeling things. The evolution, I think, is once we see more leaders embracing the journey of transformation, which is again not an easy journey. That journey of peeling away, healing. Really, it's a healing journey. The many, many layers of ego that we have constructed over a lifetime to sustain our survival, to bring us the accolades and gifts of the world, to really strip that away to get to authentic selfhood is incredibly challenging. It's not a short journey. It's not something that happens in a couple of years. For most people, it's a decade. For some, it's two, and for others, it's a lifetime. That they never really get there because they don't have the time and space to dedicate to it. But I can see this is where it's going to evolve. And like I said, I've worked with CEOs at the highest levels who are awakening. And it begins with something as simple as I really I just want to make everything better. I just want to improve the quality of my experience with every single person I encounter in this organization. And maybe I'm having some difficulties right now with some people. And I'm not going to blame them. I'm going to look deeply at who I am being in my relationship to them. And then very often, guess what happens? They start to see the stories of their youth, of their childhood, of their early educational years, that created a kind of belief about themselves and other people, and it's at play. And it's at play. I'll share one with you. Can I share another story? Because I've got another little story. It's one of my favorite stories because it speaks to the challenge of doing this work when you are enmeshed in organizational life. So this gentleman was not a CEO. He was hired as a kind of, let's say it's a huge conglomerate with many, many businesses from concrete to fabrics, textiles to hotels. Each of those businesses led by, a very powerful, very strong, dominant CEO type. And he's hired to be in the middle to help create organizationally a greater customer-centric orientation, not just of each business towards their customers, but of the entire towards the idea of customer-centric behavior. So he's got this middle position, and he's got to interact with all of these very powerful CEOs who have their idea of I'm in my silo. I'm in my silo. But he was experiencing something very, very interesting that whenever and this is a successful, intelligent, capable, on the surface man on all ways, right? Whenever he would encounter one of these CEOs and he had to bring forth ideas that were perhaps a bit challenging of the CEO's dominion. In other words, it would require the CEO to be willing to let go of control in some areas so that he could be part of a greater initiative. Very often the CEOs would stand up with strong, hard, aggressive, A-type dominant responses. And he noticed that in those moments, he would just internally, not on the surface level, he would just shrink into this little boy. Like you could just feel it, like little boy, right? And he had to first, he said, I just want to come up with strategies, Leon, for managing my behavior so I don't look like a little boy in that moment. Like so I can feel at least like they see me as one of them, equal, but with a different role. So first it was strategies to just, keep up the face kind of thing, right? Maintain appearances, whatever the phrase is. But we're talking about the deeper reality. And so we go back into his life and he says, from a very young age as a child, I was taught two things about people in authority. One, you obey them. Two, they're frightening. So whether it was my parents, the teachers, a police officer, didn't matter. When I encountered people in authority, I was over and over reinforced that I am to A, obey them, and to be afraid of them. Probably afraid first and then obey after. So imagine you're raised this way from a young age, and he's never given voice to this. He's never looked at this. And here he is in his mid 40s at the peak of a career that has been absolutely successful. And this shadow of a childhood is absolutely at the forefront of almost every conversation he's having every day that's challenging in bringing forth the initiatives he needs to bring forth. And he's struggling desperately just to manage appearances so that nobody picks up on this fact that he's crumbling inside. So, what's the work? For me, this is absolute shadow side work. Some might call it, what's that word when you work with inner child work? That's what I'm looking for. Inner child work. And there's all these healing modalities out there that help people do this work. And I think it's very powerful work. I always encourage clients, like if there are healing modalities that you're aware of and you're attracted to doing them, do explore them because there's something in learning. But he was working with me. And so we're just wanting to open this up and just kind of reveal it, show it, and be with this deep inner pain, this young child who's yearning for, whatever. And this is what he said to me. He said, Leon, I know this is important work. I get it. But can we do it next year? And that said it all to me. It said, okay, I get it. It's important. I see the impact it's having, but I'm too busy. I don't have the time for this, or I don't have the energy, or I don't even have the motivation. I would rather, Leon, spend my time each session with you trying to figure out ways to manage the issue than really, truly deal with and heal core root cause. And guess what? Next year never came. In other words, it was continually and forever pushed to the side. And that's why I say some people will be on this journey for a decade, someone will be on this journey for a lifetime because they won't truly want to go there and they'll make an excuse. I'm too busy. I don't have time. It's not that important. I can manage it. Some kind of an excuse to just not really do the deep healing work because it's hard. It makes one have to be unbelievably vulnerable with the self, to admit things to the self and to realize things about the self that are hard and shadowy and sticky and gooey and painful. But that is the work of transformation. And that's what every leader on this planet is going to have to begin to do if they truly want to be authentic, like deeply, truly authentic in this world and still have creativity, talent, innovative ideas, and make things happen on an external level. But it's going to come from such a different place within themselves.
Quite a story, actually. That's,
Yeah.
yeah. I,
Yeah.
some people, I'm a true believer that the only way to get through it is to go through it. Otherwise, it's, you just keep postponing it and then
Yeah.
it'll never be done.
Yeah. Exactly. And it's easy to do, right? Because there's always something more important than dealing with the little boy or girl inside of me who's wounded. And leader after leader after leader that I've worked with has that. And they don't recognize that it impacts every single encounter they have with anybody who triggers that part of themselves, right?
Do you think there's a kind of practice that you would have? How can somebody start, really connecting with that part of themselves? Is there like a daily practice, something to start with? Would you have any advice for the
Yeah, well,
questions?
the easiest place to begin is always to just look at what's not working, right? Just on a surface level, what's not working in my life? What's not working? And look at that. I like another question that goes, I know another question that's related to that. Then, okay, so if that's not working, if that's a challenge, an ongoing source of frustration or stress, then what are the thoughts? Just go to your thoughts. What are the thoughts that are just always recurring around that, particularly in the stress? And
Mm.
it's often there's going to be kind of a fear thought in there somewhere, like something I desire to have happen is not going to have happen. Well, fear is a wonderful place to begin the inner journey from. We want to avoid fear. I'm saying lean into the fear because the fear will take you into the thought patterns, the belief systems, the value structures that are giving rise to fear. Like something I desire to have happen or believe should happen may not happen. And something I value and care about is at risk. And then we start to develop all kinds of coping mechanisms so that we show up in the world as fearless. We don't want the world to see that every day we're crumbling and quaking inside because of stress and fear. We want the world to think we're capable and confident and we've got it all together. But that's such a great place to begin, just looking at the fear and the thoughts and then asking the question, was any of this taught to you? Let's say you notice a thought, like example, going back, you need to obey authority. Okay, well, where did that come from? Well, that was taught to me by my family, by my church, by my temple, by my synagogue, by my first grade teacher, like whatever. It was taught to me at some point. So it's not really mine. I don't own that. So here now we're starting to get into kind of looking at the shadowy sides of the way that the mind works. And then we can start to build our understanding from there because we're really working with a self concept, what I call the self concept, which is a psychological term for that part of ourself, which is learned and conditioned. And yet it gives rise to everyday experiences. So if we can start to really understand the nature of our self-concept and how much we have been conditioned and taught, we can then start to make some choices like, is this true for me? Is this really true? And if it's not really, really true, then what is true for me? And why am I not living that truth? Like Byron Katie's work with the four questions, right? Is this true? How do I know it's true? If it's not true, what else is true? What is really true? And then we sort of turn things around. Now, these are simple methods that we can use and access that begin the journey of understanding why we have certain challenges recurring, why we have certain emotional experiences recurring. And I mean, particularly the negative, heavier ones. We really have to go deeply into that. For some people who've experienced trauma, or great betrayal or great hurts and disappointments, abandonment, whatever, like all of these things from the past affect the way that we see our relationships with others. If I've been abandoned by people over and over again in my life, guess what? I'm going to be so absolutely self-reliant. I'm going to be the one who doesn't need anybody else, who can do this on their own. These kind of issues of the past come up, and we have to be willing to look at them and face them. And it's not that we have to dig terribly deep sometimes. This stuff is right at the surface. With a good coaching conversation, you can often reveal a lot of this, or even a therapeutic conversation, you can reveal a lot of this relatively quickly. And then the question is, are you willing to do the work?
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of beliefs are not ours. Somebody
No,
gave them to us. Absolutely.
right. And it's not that we have to reject all those beliefs, but it's that we become conscious in our choosing of the belief. So for example, if you go to church, and I'm just use the example from North America here, like people go to church and they say, well, Jesus taught me to love. So I was taught that I should love. So I'm working really hard to be loving because Jesus taught me to love. But it never feels in that moment like the person is deeply choosing love. It's almost like it's my obligation to my faith.
Somebody told me to.
Somebody told me to, so I'm going to act it out. It doesn't mean I'm a bad person. It doesn't mean you're not being loving. It means that it wasn't really yours. So when you sit with someone and say, "Well, are you really choosing to be love?" and they sit with that and they really, yes, and you get that, that is actually my conscious choice. That's it. You're not abandoning the belief that was taught, but you are owning and saying, "No, it's conscious now. I am choosing to believe that value. That value is worth something." Or if you believe in the value of family, like, I believe that family is important. And I was taught that from my father, who was taught that from his, passed down from generation. Did you ever choose it for yourself? Well, not exactly, but what would it be to choose that? Well, maybe family isn't as important as I thought. I mean, I think family is important, but maybe it's not the most important thing in my life. Ah, how does it feel to let go of the thought that it is to be the most important thing? And there's a liberation in choosing in a different path, right? And then you begin to think differently about your life. So it's not about abandoning all beliefs and things that we've been taught, but making it deeply, deeply conscious. And is it truly of what our highest self is asking us to do?
How beautiful is that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Leon, I know that you have some programs that are happening. How can people reach out to you, and what do you have planned in India? I know that there is something that you're planning, so would love
Yeah,
for
I
you
just actually
to.
came back from India from doing some programs in Mumbai and Dharamshala. And we have one every January. We have a deep coaching intensive. It's an online program. It's a 6-month program. And I know I'm using the word coaching here, and many people listening to this podcast not necessarily see themselves as coaches. But the reality is that this course, this deep coaching intensive, is a transformational journey for the participant before it is a coach training. So we learn coaching skills, and many leaders are because of the value of becoming a coach. There's something inherent in learning to coach that becomes a way of engaging with others. So we add another layer to that. We're not just giving a skill set. We're taking you on that deep inner journey. We're creating time and space for the things that we've been talking about today, starting with that question, who do you choose to be? And what does it take to be that, whether it's as a coach or as a leader? So I'm encouraging everyone to have a look at this program. The website is backtosource.in, and the lead on it in India is Amrita Singh. I participate in the coalition program as well. And at the Center for Transformational Coaching.com, people can also see the global cohorts. But we have one in January for the India subcontinent because of the time. And we have also a whole group of, like, a team of learning leaders who are all from India. So it's going to be India based, and it's good. I recommend everyone take this course, of course, but mostly because of the deep inner transformational work that it requires on the way.
I also really highly recommend it because I think what Leon is talking about is true transformation, not at the surface level, but the core
Yeah,
of who you are, that onion.
that's it.
I mean,
That's it. That's it. And it changes the way you lead. It's the funniest thing, taking a deep transformational course like this for coaches, ostensibly for coaches, will change the way you lead forever. It did for me. I'm the CEO and I live the way of the deep coach. I don't necessarily say that's what I am, but the way of being that that invites us to infuses everything I do in my work as a CEO.
Leon, looking at you, I know that you are exactly how you show up, which is so authentic and so real and grounded. I cannot thank you enough for coming on today and really spending this time speaking to us and talking about the essence of who we are and how to connect with that.
Yeah. Endlessly fascinating. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. That was Leon VanderPol, and I'm signing off now. Thank you. Atma Namaste.